From the welcome on the tarmac to a private audiences, First Nations culture was highlighted during the first day of King Charles' visit to Canada. That was part of the opening welcoming ceremony for the King and Queen, and then late yesterday afternoon, a scheduling change was made, and the King held audiences with Assembly of First Nations National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Neepanak, ITK President Nathan Obed, and President of the Métis National Council Victoria Pruden. So for more on the concerns that Indigenous leaders would want to bring before the King, we're joined this morning by Cody Grote, Assistant Professor, History and Indigenous Studies at Western University and the Chair of Canadian Commission for the UNESCO Memory of the World Advisory Committee. Cody, good morning.
Good morning.
Listen, we know these visits with His Majesty are private. There's no press allowed. But first of all, I'm curious, what does it signify that in this very short visit, just 24 hours, the King held audiences with all three leaders?
I was surprised to see the King having these meetings because the official itinerary that was released last week did not have these scheduled. He only had scheduled audiences with Governor General Mary Simon and with Prime Minister Mark Carney, as well as his lieutenant governors or his provincial representatives. So seeing these three meetings added in, I don't know the context for why those might have occurred, but I think it's definitely both symbolic and practical. And that's one thing Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami President Nathan Obed said. These meetings are going to be practical with the King.
Yeah, so then maybe delve into that a little bit. What could practical mean? What would be the key issues that in this limited amount of time they have with the sovereign that they would bring forward that would be of great importance?
I think King Charles is very politically aware, obviously. I don't think he'll delve into policy issues because he knows that's not his place necessarily. There's a new prime minister. He's going to be reading the speech from the throne, articulating Mark Carney's legislative priorities, but the King himself will stay away from those legislative conversations. I think King Charles will try to build a relationship, I would say, with these three national Indigenous leaders without delving into specific policy issues. But the fact that he's having these meetings is still very important and significant. We didn't see that with his predecessor, Queen Elizabeth II, and King Charles has had meetings with the leaders of these three organizations regularly. They were at his coronation. He's had meetings with them in Buckingham Palace. So I think we can see he's consistently nurturing this relationship in a way that might be necessary for him as a monarch now.
Yeah, in particular with President Nathan Obed, he has met with the King on a few different occasions. Let's go back a little bit. And, you know, in comparing his relationship with Indigenous peoples to that of Queen Elizabeth II, what actions has the King taken to reference his knowledge and awareness since his last visit in May of 2022?
So in his visit in May 2022, he had really a reconciliation focus to some of his activities. We saw him meeting with residential school survivors, going to memorial gardens, for instance, for residential school survivors. And I think that tone was necessary. That was sort of in the immediate aftermath of the unmarked graves identified at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School. And I think King Charles is aware around the world he needs to change what it means to be a monarch. We see other Commonwealth countries moving towards republicanism where they're abolishing the monarchy. And King Charles is aware that he needs to change his attitude, or the attitude of the monarchy, I should say, towards Indigenous people. So in some ways, I think having these meetings, he recognizes them as a necessity, building these bridges to sort of reinterpret the role of the monarchy. And perhaps it better reflects this Indigenous perspective that we have, that we are sovereign allies to the crown. We are not necessarily subjects to the crown in the way that Canadians might perceive that relationship with the monarchy.
Oh, I really like that lens, Cody. You know, I was curious about this because we do, you know, there is a ceremonial component to Indigenous peoples and events like these. And, you know, this visit is to underscore Canada's sovereignty, in particular to the U.S. So beyond being ceremonial, what does a visit mean to Indigenous communities by the sovereign?
Yeah, you worded it very well. This visit is 100% about Canadian sovereignty and articulating that in response to American claims of contesting, you know, our sovereign presence here in Canada. So the King's coming to reassert his role. But when you assert Canadian sovereignty, you almost necessarily deny the legitimacy of Indigenous sovereignty. So when we have these relationships being fostered with the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, for instance, she's asserting very clearly First Nation sovereignty does exist in this country. I am meeting you, King Charles III, as a sovereign-to-sovereign relationship. That in some ways reasserts and perhaps challenges kind of that grand ideology that Mark Carney's introducing with this state visit, But I think it's really interesting that we're seeing the nuance in this conversation in ways that I didn't think we were going to have, because I didn't think we were going to have those private audiences.
Great conversation today. Cody Grote, I'm glad that you joined us for it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.